So that was the track. This is the project, and I'm gonna try and show you what I used and what I did as quickly as I can. It's the first time I tried doing anything like this, so please bear with me. I didn't take any notes. Um, I'll try and be brief, but mostly I will riff. Can I riff? Let's riff. All right, first thing first, I did all of this in Bitwig. I was considering at the beginning maybe using some sort of hardware sampler or something, but then I started browsing through sounds, and as I was browsing through the samples, I noticed how well they were prepared. Basically, I would just double click on the samples, and they would load in Bitwig Sampler, already mapped and ready to play, which was awesome. Before I show you all the sound sources, I didn't do much traditional MIDI sequencing because I mostly used um, a third-party sequencer. Now I'm going to show you what I mean. But in case you're not familiar, you probably already know this, but in case you're not familiar with the concept of hybrid tracks, these are hybrid tracks. This is how Bitwig shows them, so half audio and half keyboard. And these are tracks that can host both MIDI and audio clips. So usually you find this kind of stuff, and basically this would mean that it used to be a MIDI clip here, and then you would bounce, and after bouncing it would become an audio clip. And if you want to keep the MIDI clip, you would save it somewhere. In my case, I would save it in the clip launcher. But as you can see, even in the clip launcher, I don't have much MIDI clips. And I have a bunch of hidden tracks that I will show you. But even in the hidden tracks, I don't have many MIDI clips. And that's because I was using an external sequencer. So I started with the drums, a lead, and a bass. And apart from the lead that I played normally with a keyboard and the bass, same thing, the drums were all done using this third-party sequencer that I'm about to show you, just to show you how I approached doing the track. So the sequencer is part of Reason, and it's my favorite software sequencer. It's gonna take a second because I'm also screen recording, so CPU hates me right now. Yeah, here it is. It's called PSQ1684. It's by Electric Panda. And well, I can't go into details about how this works, although I might at some point. I have a lot of discussions about this thing with people, because some people tend to find this kind of complicated, but it's just, I think it's mostly because of the way it looks. Once you understand it, it's quite straightforward. This bit here is a pulse generator. These are 16 pulse generators. And this is a sequencer. There are 8 sequencers. And this is a quantizer. There are 4 quantizers. This area here, these are, you can consider this the clocks of each of these pulses. There is also a general clock, but here you can set the clock division, and you can use Euclidean sequencing. You can use shift register and do CLE sequencing and all sorts of stuff. You can basically do any kind of pulse-based sequencing there is. It's an extremely deep and flexible unit. I mapped this through Bitwig here. I mapped this to a controller, a MIDI fighter twister, and I configure some variations on the pattern, and then I just perform and I record automation. All of the drum track is here, as you can see. So these automations are actually the performance I did that translated into this. I then did some minor editing, like I kind of picked holes here and there, nothing massive. So all the percussions are based on this, with the exception of the clap. The clap, I created this switch, which is also was also mapped to the MIDI fighter twister. This make it so that this track either takes its data from PSQ or from this MIDI clip. This MIDI clip I did in Bitwig. using the new sequencing capabilities that Bitwig 4 provided, which is basically Electron-style sequencing, but you can combine probability and conditional sequencing. Let's just go through the sounds. So the hats are an 6 MOD6, and the clap is a plankton winter modular zaps. This percussion, which might be a bit of a vague term for it, but it's mostly affecting the side of the drum pattern when it plays in context, but isolated is this guy. I'm keeping the mix a bit lower now that I'm recording a video. And so this percussion is Godfather kicks with a few effects that were depending on like velocity and all of that. I used a few modulators. It's actually one modulator. I used an audio sidechain. Then we have kick and bass. The kick is Rabbit Elephant, which, I mean, awesome name. And the bass is Nymphs 5. I hope that this is how you read this, Nymphs, because I don't know if I used all of them, but I used a lot of them, and I'm gonna keep saying Nymphs. So hopefully it's Nymphs. They're all awesome. The secondary pair of kick and snare that comes here. So this guy is another 6 MOD6. Then you got this thing that I call candy because it's nothing but an ear candy. Dofer 1 2 6. The drums are done. The other rhythmic element, chirp here, which is this thingy. So this thing is another Nymphs, and basically I also did, I created a sequencer where I did this and this as well. And I was having some problems recording the automations, so what I had to do is I created 2 channels with 2 different samplers with different modulators on them, and they both are named 7 Spread'em, which sounds nasty, and they were recorded directly to audio. So I took the audio output of this and I just recorded it because I couldn't record any sort of MIDI data or automation data. Actually, I know that technically I could record the PSQ outputs as MIDI data, but every time I tried doing that, my computer just it doesn't like it. So I just don't do it anymore. The other element here in the high end is another Nymphs, as you can read from the name. It's Nymphs 6, wait for it. And this is a very basic thing. This is just I just did a little bit of an arpeggiated sequence on my MIDI keyboard. And yeah, so it sounds like this. The very first thing I did is that awesome Bookline tip-top audio module. Yeah, so I have the sampler here. Here it is, Bookline tip-top audio. This thing looks promising. I really hope to get my hands on it. And finally, we had this bit that I call chorus. These are 2 elements. One is the quasar. So this thing and this thing are the same thing. They come from the same instrument. This is the only thing that I didn't do in Bitwig because Bitwig sampler doesn't do time stretching. So I have other samplers for doing that. But in this case, I decided to try out Mimic, which is the new sampler by Reason. Basically, I updated to Reason 12 to ensure compatibility with the M1s. And yeah, they added a new sampler, their 10th sampler. That's what they felt like they needed doing. And I got to say, it's a cool sampler. It's very easy, nothing mind bending, but super quick to use, and some basic effects that sounds cool. And yeah, I applied some other very basic sound processing. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool stuff. So I used this for both those sounds, just played it on different octaves. And finally, we get to the Waldorf. Now, the Waldorf is the sound that I warped the most. This is another one. This was one of the first sounds I did, but in the beginning, before I established what the track was going to be, this was an idea for some sort of lead. Then I decided that it was supposed to have a different role. I kind of like what it was doing. I wanted to keep it like a bit more as an ethereal kind of thing. So what I did is I applied a bunch of effects that are here, as you can see, and all of these effects, they're like groups of effects that are triggered by different elements in the track. So some effects are triggered by the drums, some effects are triggered by the high end, and so on and so forth. And that causes the sound to shift and move. But it was still a bit too much. So I did this cheap trick that I do when I'm not sure what else to do. I bounced it once it had movement that was somehow rhythmical, and it was actually very rhythmical. And I took the bounced version and I dragged it backwards a little bit, and then I face flipped it, and I started trying to see what would come out. And then I played around with automation in different areas of the track, and the result is this guy. Which gets a bit more of a movement here. So yeah, I think I covered everything. These two tracks, I don't know why this is short again. These two tracks are just buses with a little bit of compression. So yeah, I used Bitwig's effects and some filters effects and some sound toys. Really, it's all about how I activate them. As a rule of thumb, that's what I do all the time in this track. It's all about the modulators. So it's all about uh, this kind of stuff. You know, like you might have some key tracking or some audio sidechain that would basically use the audio as a modulation source for an effect. In this case, distortion. Almost forgot. The only other thing I did is a little bit of very basic mastering. I didn't do it inside of this project because, like, obvious reasons. But yeah, it's your usual multiband, some EQing, multiband, and limiting, nothing more than that. I think I went through everything, or at least most of the things. I hope this was enough. And I hope this wasn't too boring. If you stuck with me this long, well, thanks very much. And yeah, last but not least, a huge thank you to Loopop for organizing this super cool contest and for giving us this super cool sample packs, and also for the channel in general. You know, it's the most informative gear channel out there. Like every time you want to know how to use something and you don't want to read a manual, basically just go to Loopop. Even if it's something that you just don't own, which is actually what I do most of the time. I just start looking at stuff that I would like to have, and then I know how to use that stuff, and then I never buy it, but I know how to use it. So so that's awesome, and I'm sure that if there was such a thing as people that just leave off of like writing manuals for stuff, I'm sure that like a huge bunch of them would just watch your videos and just go like, well, that's depressing.